Welcome everyone. Welcome to the New Ulm Forum. I'm Ruth Ann Webster, and today we're going to be talking about barn quilts. I know that our League of Women Voters program often focuses on community affairs, and you might wonder, how is a barn quilt going to become part of the community? But I think you're going to find out when we're done listening to our guest today, Kay Burnett Martin.
Hello.
Hello. And Kay, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, thanks for having me here. I was born here in New Ulm and grew up here, graduated from high school and took off for college. And then my career, I was an elementary art teacher up in Staples, Minnesota, which is near Brainerd. I spent 33 years in Staples. And now I decided to move back home to New Ulm. I moved back here April 1st. And part of my life up in Staples was being a part of a barn quilt trail. And first of all, I guess I need to go back and explain what a barn quilt is.
Oh, well, we'll get to that in a minute, because I'm going to ask you a question that my mother used to ask. My mother, when I would come home and say, oh, I'm taking a class with Jerry Aarons or Pam Wisey or something like that, my mother would say to me, well, now, who was her mother? So, so just so people know, why don't you explain what your parents did here in New Ulm, and for people who might remember your mom and dad.
My parents moved here in 1954 when I was born that year, a month after they got here. So I was their only child born in New Ulm. Dad was a radiologist, Union Hospital and Loretta Hospital, and probably a few years after they started, he even opened his own school for X-ray technicians. He didn't like the quality he was finding, so he decided to train them himself. So he had that school at Loretta, and he had 2 students at a time for a 2-year program. My mother was Virginia, or Ginny Burnett, and she was the first of 2 women that were voted onto city council in 1974. She was a champion for women, and she fought hard to get the Glockenspiel created in New Ulm and the Vogel Arena. So I'm real happy to come back, and I'm going to actually work at the Vogel Arena teaching fitness classes. So well, that's exciting.
And Judy was a member of our League of Women Voters.
Yes.
So
well, she was president for a while.
Absolutely.
I know that.
Yeah, right. Well, and she was a wonderful person to be around, and so thank you for sharing that.
She also worked hard to get the John Lind House back to the form it's in now. She and some other people started that whole movement.
A wonderful legacy, wonderful legacy. Yeah. Well, now let's get back to barn quilts. I know that you and I spent quite a bit of time talking about barn quilts, and I know you're a barn quilt maven, I'll call you. So why don't you just talk about how you got started with thinking about barn quilts and what you know about barn quilts?
Well, 2 of my friends in Staples, 2 other teachers, decided to write a grant. They learned about barn quilts somehow. I don't know where. But they wrote a grant to begin to teach classes in Staples. I wasn't able to go to that class, but I got really excited when I saw what a barn quilt was. So then I did some research to find out where did this whole movement begin. And it was a daughter and mother. The mother was a quilter and had a big history of quilting in their family. They moved from Kentucky to Ohio to a rural home that had an ugly barn. And the daughter was trying so hard to figure out a way to make her barn look better for her mother. And she said, I think, since you're a quilter, I think I'll paint a big quilt square on the side of the barn. And that was in 1989. And as things go, she thought about it and planned it and just kind of didn't do it. But eventually she told some friends, and they told some friends, and then they all got started talking about maybe we could do more than one. And a quilt laid out that her mother made was 20 squares, so they decided to make 20 barn quilts. So they found 20 people that wanted barn quilts on their barns. And by October 13th, 2001, they unveiled the barn quilt, the 20 in Ohio. It's Adams County, Ohio. And her name was Donna Sue Gross.
Okay. And now, with a little technology, I believe that you're going to be providing NewCat, our host here, with some pictures of some barn quilts. But yes. Now, you described it as a big quilt square that goes on a barn. It's not cloth, though.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not.
She painted right onto the barn, or she hired painters to put it on the barn. What it has transpired into now is putting it on a piece of signboard called a MDO board, which is medium density overlay, which is a protection over plywood. And then you prime it, 3 coats of primer everywhere, fill in any holes and gaps, and then paint on top of that with high quality exterior paint. And then I do a spray finish with a clear coat after that.
Now I know, because you and I talked about this before we got started, you are teaching a class in barn quilts, right? Yes, you are. Why don't you tell us, why don't you give us the who, what, where, when, how, why about your barn quilt class?
Okay. I've taught barn quilt classes before, and I've enjoyed them so much I just wanted to come to New Ulm and maybe start a barn quilt trail here. So I have to start somewhere. So my first class is going to be at the Grand, June 26th and 27th. We have 12 people signed up, and that's a full class. It's going to be Saturday and a Sunday.
Well, and why don't you just
about 10 hours long.
Right. Start from the beginning. Let's just say I was lucky enough to get into your class, and I show up, and what do I have? What do you expect your students to bring to the class?
The first thing they need is an idea, colors that they would like to use, and a design. And if they don't have that, I have some samples that they can choose from, and I will come with a certain number of colors, but then I'm going to teach from a color wheel. I'm going to teach them how to mix colors. So we'll start with primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue. Teach them how to mix orange and green and purple, and then make lighter, make darker, whatever they need to know. I like to teach color theory. So it's a lot of fun, and they get some art learning along the way. Then we take that design and put it onto graph paper. From the graph paper, we enlarge it onto a 2 by 2 foot square, and that's going to be the size of their barn quilt. Some are 4 by 4, some are 8 by 8. They have to be a multiple of 2.
So, can you kind of just, like I said, I know we're probably going to be having some pictures, but can you talk about some of the motifs people use, or some of the ideas, or some of the more interesting barn quilts that you've seen?
Well, some go with something that's important to them. Some just pick a design randomly and say, that's pretty, and then choose some colors that might go with their house. I chose a floral design because I'm a gardener and I grow flowers. I take pictures of flowers, and then I make cards with my flower pictures. So flowers are important to me. Some will go with a nationality. I'm making a barn quilt for a family whose roots are in Norway. And in his community in Norway, they have a symbol for their town, and that's going on their barn quilt along with their name. Some businesses have barn quilts, and the apple orchard up in Staples had an 8 by 8, and there's apples on their motif. So.
Well, and you mentioned Staples, and that's where you were from, and there was a program there of many barn quilts that you helped get started. Can you talk about that?
Yes, we have, part of the grant that they wrote for teaching the classes was to develop a brochure which has pictures of barn quilts, and then over 100 people have made barn quilts, and then they have little icons of each barn quilt with the address. And then you unfold the whole brochure, and there's a map with little dots where every barn quilt is. So you can take an afternoon and go touring around the countryside looking at the barn quilts. You can also open up the website and get a little story about each barn quilt and hear the reasoning why they chose the colors, maybe the heritage that goes behind the scenes of the, if it's Swedish or Norwegian or German, and possibly a little history of the quilt square. Maybe, I had one lady in class who designs quilts. So her quilt square was one of her very own that she designed. And then she has a picture of her quilt next to her barn quilt painting. So that's exciting.
Well, and I think, didn't you say that several of the downtown businesses had barn
Yes,
quilts
yeah.
Focused on their business? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. The drugstore in town has a pestle and what's it called?
Mortar and pestle.
Mortar and pestle in the center of theirs. The high school class art teacher in Staples took on the businesses in town, and they did 4x4 squares for all the businesses that wanted them. So they're everywhere.
Yeah,
It's really fun to drive around and see all of them.
Well, and you've got some dreams for expanding that idea in New Ulm. What would you like to see?
I would love the heritage of New Ulm to come through with the German traditional quilting, and I hope to find some. I haven't discovered that yet, but I'm sure there are designs that are typically German designs that would go on to, and you don't have to put it on a barn. That's another thing, is mine is hanging on the front of my house on Broadway, so people can drive by and see it all the time. And you can make them so that they're very decorative and look very nice on your home. You can put them on your garage, you can put them on your barn if you have a barn. You can just hang them from a post, because a lot of churches have put them just in their front yard on a post.
Okay. Interesting. If people are interested, how should they follow up with you? I know you're teaching at the Grand. Is that a good contact information?
Yes, or I can put out my email address and people can email questions to me.
Maybe we can get, okay.
Yeah, that's pretty
go.
easy.
There we go.
Should I say it now or later?
Well, you can say it, and then we'll count on our crack communications people
And?
there to get that on the on the picture. So, what is your email address?
KAY.MARTIN@rocketmail.com.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Yeah.
So it's basically your name.
My name with a dot between them.
And rocket mail.
Right.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
And the Grand also, it's my hopes that we'll just keep continuing having the class offered until nobody wants to take it anymore.
Oh, well, that'll be wonderful. That'll be wonderful. Well, and that gives me a nice way of working into this because I think that you're one of a number of people who grew up in New Ulm and are coming back to New Ulm. And I've just appreciated if you talk a little bit about what it's like to come back. What did you find that was just wonderful, and how do you feel about, I mean, just tell us about your adventure of coming back home.
Coming back home. Well, I think the warmth of New Ulm and the love that people have shown me complete strangers, has been wonderful. And because we have Facebook and the internet, we can reach out and just enjoy each other. On New Ulm Now and Then, that page on Facebook, I put out a request for some supplies for one of my art classes at the Grand, and people came out of the woodwork and made donations and more donations, and strangers, it was just wonderful. And welcoming me back to town, not knowing who I am or anything about me, but just being very warm and very inviting. And then every once in a while I start talking to a person and they remember my mom or remember my dad, or they worked with one of them or the other. And to hear those stories and, to hear, oh, your dad was such a funny guy, or your mom was so wonderful and she helped me a lot. And, those kind of things are just great to hear. And I do have high school friends that are still around. I just saw another one last night. I probably hadn't seen him in 48 years. And they still remember me, and I still remember them. So it's really fun to just nose around and see people.
Talk about the Grand and your experience with the Grand and how that's
Oh my gosh. What a treasure. I can't believe that place. I don't remember it at all, from growing up. I don't know what was there, but Ann Makepeace, what she has done with that building is just phenomenal. It is so beautiful inside and so well cared for now. And then the classes they offer, small groups, and very well organized. The space is wonderful, big windows, lots of light. The kids coming in are just great.
Right, and perhaps I should have mentioned that, but now your barn quilt classes are coming up, but you have been teaching other classes. Why don't you tell us about that?
I taught just last week, Monday through Thursday. In the morning, it was kindergarten through 4th grade children, and we got to design whatever we wanted to teach them. I did some weaving with the older kids, and I did some fun, crafty paper projects and drawing with the little ones. We did paper mache, and we did pottery was done by there were 2 other teachers there, and we helped each other. And the kids just had a blast.
Oh, right.
And then in the afternoon, it was 5th grade through 7th grade. And the children were just wonderful and happy to be there, and we were happy to have them, and we just had a really good time.
And happy to be happy. You were happy.
I was happy. I love teaching, and I love being with kids.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what I'm teaching, I just like to get out there and help people learn.
Well, and is there anything else we should talk about barn quilts? That's our main thing. I'm really excited I'll be interested to see how this moves forward. I have a feeling that your class is going to give you the direction and the inspiration, and perhaps next year at this time, I'll be opening up a brochure and driving around town looking for barn quilts everywhere.
Would be so wonderful.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah. I have heard that there's a few people that have them in the area. So I would love to hear from them and hear their story and have them included in the barn quilt trail whenever that starts to be formed. But the more we can get out there, the more it just kind of brings a community together, because it's just something that has come through generations. Quilt making is been going on forever, and those quilts are passed down through generations and generations, and the barn quilts can be passed down from generation to generation.
And it's such a positive way of connecting. You know, people might not have anything else in common, except that they just want to make a statement about themselves, or beautify their home, or
add a little beauty out in the world.
Right,
yes.
That's right,
Yeah.
Beauty in the world. Well, you've brought some beauty in the world.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for teaching your classes at the Grand. Thank you for talking to us about barn quilts. Thank you very
welcome.
much.
Thanks for
Kay
having me.
Burnett Martin. Yay! Thank you.